The stacks of boxes in Grandpa's farmhouse looked like the bones of my childhood, disassembled and packed away by strangers. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my cousins divide his life into piles marked sell, keep, and trash just 3 days after his funeral. No one had bothered to tell me they were meeting today. No one had bothered to call me at all. What's happening here? My voice cracked as I stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and coffee still lingering in the air. 5 heads turned toward me in unison, expressions shifting from surprise to discomfort to something that looked suspiciously like guilt. My cousin Patrick recovered first, setting down the antique clock he'd been examining. "Emma, we didn't expect you until tomorrow." The lie hung in the air between us. The group text about today's meeting had conspicuously excluded my number. Clearly, I moved further into the living room where Grandpa had taught me to play chess, where he'd held my hand after Mom died, where he'd told stories of the land that had been in our family for 4 generations. I didn't realize we were already dividing his things. Aunt Diane, my father's older sister, stepped forward with a clipboard in hand. "We're just getting organized, dear. There's so much to sort through, and decisions need to be made about the property." "The property?" My stomach tightened. Grandpa's only been gone 3 days. My cousin Melissa, Diane's daughter, exchanged glances with her brother Patrick. "We've actually been discussing the farm for a few weeks now, since Grandpa went into hospice. It makes the most financial sense to sell." Sell. The word felt like a betrayal in my mouth. This is our family legacy. Grandpa would never want. "Emma." Patrick's voice took on the patronizing tone he'd perfected since childhood. "We need to be practical. None of us live close enough to maintain a 200-acre farm. The property taxes alone are crushing." I looked around the room at the family I'd grown distant from over the years. Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert, their children Patrick and Melissa, and my father's younger brother, Uncle James. They'd all drifted away from the farm years ago, building careers and lives in cities across the country, while I had stayed within an hour's drive, visiting Grandpa every weekend. "I live close enough," I said quietly. "I could maintain it." Uncle James snorted. "On a teacher's salary? Be realistic, Emma." "Besides," Diane continued, glancing at her clipboard, "according to the will, your share is only 10%. The property decisions fall to the majority stakeholders." She gestured around the room. "That's us. 10%. I felt my chest tighten. That can't be right. Patrick picked up a document from the coffee table. "It's all here in black and white. Dad and Uncle James each got 30%. Your father got 30%, and you inherited his share when he died. But since you were still a minor, Grandpa amended the will to place most of your father's portion in trust for the family collective, leaving you with 10% when you turned 25. The room swam before me. "I don't understand. Grandpa would have told me something this important." "Maybe he didn't want to hurt your feelings," Melissa suggested, her sympathy as thin as tissue paper. "The point is, we've already had preliminary discussions with the developer. They're offering $7 million for the entire property. $7 million. The number should have been impressive, but all I could think about was the orchard Grandpa and I had restored together, the creek where he'd taught me to fish, the fields where generations of our family had worked the land. "I need to see the will," I said, reaching for the papers in Patrick's hand. He passed them over with a shrug. "It won't change anything. Your share is too small to matter in this decision, Emma. I'm sorry, but that's the reality." As I scanned the document, my hands trembling slightly, Uncle Robert spoke up for the first time. "We're thinking of you too, you know. 10% of $7 million is still a nice windfall for a young teacher. You could buy a proper house, maybe even switch to that private school you were talking about." The words blurred before my eyes. Something about this felt wrong, deeply wrong. Grandpa had always told me the farm would be my inheritance, my birthright. He'd spent countless hours teaching me about the land, showing me the property boundaries, explaining the history of each field and structure. Why would he have cut me out like this? When was this amendment made? I asked, finding the date on the document. September 2018? That's right, Aunt Diane confirmed. After his heart attack, he wanted to make sure everything was in order. September 2018. The timing struck me as significant, but I couldn't immediately place why. Then it hit me. I'd been in Europe that fall, teaching English on a 1-year exchange program. It was the only extended period I'd been away from Grandpa since moving back to the area after college. I'd like time to review all of this before any decisions are made, I said, straightening my shoulders. And I want to speak with Grandpa's lawyer directly. Patrick and Melissa exchanged another glance. We're meeting with the developer on Friday, Patrick said. We've all agreed this is the best path forward. All except me, I reminded him. Your 10% doesn't change the math, Emma, Uncle James said bluntly. Majority rules. That's how these things work. I looked around at their faces, family who had barely visited Grandpa during his final years, who had been too busy for holidays at the farm, who had delegated his care to nursing staff while I sat by his bed reading his favorite books aloud. These people who now stood in his house, dividing his legacy 3 days after laying him in the ground. I think Grandpa deserves more respect than this, I said quietly. And so do I. Oh, Emma, Aunt Diane sighed. Always so sentimental. That's why Grandpa adored you. But sentiment doesn't pay property taxes or fix the roof or maintain 200 acres of land. You've already made up your minds, I realized aloud. You're not even considering alternatives. Because there aren't any viable alternatives, Patrick said firmly. We're being practical. I clutched the will in my hand. I'd like to take this with me, to review properly. That's Grandpa's official copy, Aunt Diane objected. It should stay here. Then make me a copy. Now. Something in my tone must have conveyed I wouldn't be backing down, because Robert silently took the papers to Grandpa's old office where the printer was kept. While we waited, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. I wandered to the fireplace mantel, looking at the photos Grandpa had displayed proudly. My graduation, the 2 of us in the orchard, an old picture of my father as a boy. There were few photos of my cousins or aunts and uncles. I'd never noticed that before. Here you go, Uncle Robert said, returning with warm pages fresh from the printer. But Emma, try to understand our position. None of us can afford to maintain this place, and it's worth millions. Sometimes the practical decision is the right one. I took the papers without responding and gathered my purse. I'll be at the meeting on Friday, I said. Don't make any final decisions before then. Emma, Patrick began. Friday, I repeated firmly, then walked out the door, letting it close behind me with a decisive click. The drive back to my apartment took 40 minutes, through rolling farmland that would soon be transformed into luxury housing developments if my family had their way. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting back tears that threatened to blur my vision. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about honoring Grandpa's wishes, about preserving something precious and irreplaceable. When I reached my small 1-bedroom apartment, I spread the copied will across my kitchen table and read every line carefully. The amendment was there, just as Patrick had said, reducing my inheritance to 10% of the farm and assets. But something still felt off about the whole situation. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old text messages from Grandpa. Even in his final years, he'd been surprisingly tech-savvy for a man in his 80s. I found what I was looking for from October 2018, just after the amendment was supposedly made. Can't wait to show you the new North Field irrigation when you're back from Europe, Emmy. Remember what I always say, this land will be your legacy one day. Love you, kiddo. I stared at the message, confusion and suspicion growing. Why would he tell me the land would be my legacy after supposedly reducing my share to a mere 10%? On a hunch, I called Grandpa's neighbor, Harold, who had farmed the adjacent property for decades. "Emma, honey," Harold's gruff voice answered. "I was going to call you. Saw cars at your grandpa's place today." "My family's decided to sell the farm," I said without preamble. "They say their shares add up to 90% and mine is only 10, so I have no say." A lengthy pause followed. "That don't sound right," Harold finally said. "Your grandpa was pretty clear about his intentions for that place. Did he ever mention changing his will to you? In 2018, maybe." 2018? Harold sounded confused. "Don't recall anything like that. But I do remember him being mighty upset that fall, when those cousins of yours came around several times while you were in Europe. Something about investment opportunities they wanted him to consider." My cousins had visited Grandpa while I was away? This was the first I'd heard of it. Patrick and Melissa had always been too busy to visit when I invited them for holidays or birthdays. "Harold, do you know who Grandpa's lawyer was? The one who handled his will." "Sure do. Margaret Simmons in town. Known her 40 years. Good woman, straight shooter." I thanked Harold and immediately looked up Margaret Simmons' office number. To my relief, she answered despite the late afternoon hour. "Ms. Simmons, my name is Emma Carter. My grandfather was William Carter." "Emma, of course," she interrupted warmly. "I'm so sorry about Bill. He was a wonderful man. I was at the service, but didn't get a chance to speak with you." "Thank you. I'm calling because there are some questions about Grandpa's will. My family is moving very quickly to sell the farm, and they're saying I only have a 10% share." A pause. That doesn't sound right at all. My heart leaped. So there wasn't an amendment in 2018. 2018? She sounded confused. "No. The last amendment Bill made was in 2021, after his second heart attack. He was very specific about his wishes." The room seemed to tilt slightly. 2021? But my family has a document showing an amendment from 2018 that reduces my share to 10%. "Emma," Ms. Simmons' voice turned serious, "I've been your grandfather's attorney for 30 years. I handled all his legal affairs. If there's a document from 2018, I didn't prepare it, and he never mentioned it to me." A chill ran through me. "Is there any way I could see the official will? The actual most recent version?" "Of course. I was planning to contact all the beneficiaries next week for the formal reading. But given the circumstances, why don't you come by my office tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock. "I'll be there," I promised. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, surrounded by the copied pages of what I now suspected was a fraudulent document. Had my cousins somehow convinced Grandpa to sign something while I was away? Or was this something even worse? Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with questions and half-formed theories. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to uncover the truth. Margaret Simmons' office was in a converted Victorian house in the center of town. She greeted me with a firm handshake and ushered me into a conference room where a thick folder lay waiting. "Before we begin," she said, settling across from me, "I want to express my concern about what you told me yesterday. Your grandfather was very clear about his intentions for the farm. What exactly were his intentions?" I asked, holding my breath. She opened the folder and extracted a document. The most recent amendment, dated June 2021, specifically addresses the distribution of the farm property. She turned several pages and pointed to a paragraph. "Here. To my granddaughter, Emma Louise Carter, I bequeath 70% ownership of the family farm property and all structures thereon." I stared at the words, unable to speak. "The remaining 30% is divided equally among your aunts and uncles. 10% each," she continued. "Bill was explicit that you were to have controlling interest in the property. 70%. I finally managed, but they showed me a document saying I only had 10. Ms. Simmons frowned. "May I see what they showed you?" I pulled the copied pages from my bag and handed them over. She examined them carefully, her frown deepening. "This appears to be falsified," she said after several minutes. "The formatting is similar to our firm's documents, but there are subtle differences. And this signature," she pointed to Grandpa's name. "I witnessed every document Bill signed. This isn't his signature." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "Are you saying this is forged?" "It certainly appears that way," she replied gravely. "Do you know where the original of this document is?" "My aunt said it was Grandpa's official copy. They're keeping it at the farmhouse." Ms. Simmons nodded slowly. "Emma, what you've described, your family excluding you from meetings, moving quickly to sell valuable property, presenting documents that contradict the legitimate will, these are serious concerns. What should I do?" "First, you should know your legal position." She tapped the real will. "According to this, you own 70% of the farm. Any sale would require your approval. Your grandfather also named you as executor of his estate." "Me? Not Aunt Diane." "Definitely you. Bill was very clear about that." She hesitated. "Given what you've told me, I'm concerned about the security of assets in the home. There may be valuable items or documents that should be protected." My thoughts went to the cell piles I'd seen them creating. They're already dividing his belongings. Without the executor's permission, that's improper. Ms. Simmons' expression hardened. "I suggest we take immediate action. I can file emergency paperwork this morning to officially register you as executor and halt any unauthorized disposal of assets." "And what about the meeting with the developer on Friday?" A small smile appeared on her face. "I think that meeting might still be quite educational for everyone involved. But first, let's make sure we've secured your legal position." The next 2 days passed in a blur of legal paperwork and preparation. Ms. Simmons worked efficiently, filing the necessary documents to establish me as executor and securing a court order preventing any sale or removal of property from the farm without my consent. She also arranged for a locksmith to change the locks on the farmhouse, giving me the only set of keys. By Friday morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. The reality that Grandpa had entrusted me with his legacy, that he had truly meant for the farm to be mine, filled me with a bittersweet mixture of grief and gratitude. Ms. Simmons had advised me not to confront my family with what we'd discovered until the meeting with the developer. "Let them show their hand fully," she'd suggested. "Sometimes people reveal important information when they think they're in control." The developer's sleek black SUV was already parked in the farmhouse driveway when I arrived at 11 o'clock. I'd timed my entrance deliberately, allowing the meeting to begin without me. Through the front window, I could see my family seated around the dining room table with 2 men in expensive suits. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my simple navy dress, and used my new key to unlock the door. The conversation inside halted abruptly as I entered. 7 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from annoyance to confusion. "Emma," Patrick recovered first. "You're late." "Actually, I'm right on time." I smiled politely and approached the table. "For my meeting." One of the suited men stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Carter? I'm Jonathan Weiss from Meridian Development. Your family has told me about your sentimental attachment to the property. I want to assure you that our plans include preserving the historical facade of the farmhouse and naming the community Carter Estates in honor of your family's legacy." I shook his hand, but directed my response to my family. "Have you shown Mr. Weiss the will yet? The real one, I mean." Aunt Diane's face tightened. "We've provided all the necessary documentation showing ownership percentages." "Interesting." I placed my leather portfolio on the table and removed a stack of papers. "Because I have here the actual will and most recent amendment, certified by Grandpa's attorney, Margaret Simmons." Uncle James scoffed. "We've all seen the will, Emma." "Have you?" I pushed the documents toward Mr. Weiss. According to Grandpa's legitimate will, I own 70% of this property and am the executor of his estate. Any sale would require my approval, which I have no intention of giving. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Weiss picked up the papers and began reading, his colleague leaning in beside him. "This is ridiculous," Patrick finally sputtered. "We have the will right here." He held up the document I'd seen earlier, the one with the forged signature. I asked quietly, "Ms. Simmons has already filed a report about that with the authorities." The color drained from Melissa's face. "What are you talking about?" "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." I turned to Mr. Weiss. "Mr. Weiss, I apologize for the confusion, but there will be no sale. This meeting is concluded." The developer looked between me and my stunned family members, clearly sensing he'd walked into a family dispute far more complicated than he'd been led to believe. "Perhaps we should reschedule when the ownership matters are clarified," he suggested diplomatically. "There's nothing to clarify," I said firmly. "I own 70% of this farm, and it's not for sale. Not now, not ever." Mr. Weiss nodded, gathering his materials. "We'll see ourselves out. Please contact us if circumstances change." With practiced efficiency, he and his colleague exited, leaving me alone with my family. The moment the front door closed, the room erupted. "How dare you embarrass us like that? You have no right to interfere. This is completely unacceptable." I held up my hand, and to my surprise, they fell silent. "I think we need to discuss why you presented a forged document as Grandpa's will, why you excluded me from family meetings, and why you are attempting to sell property that isn't yours to sell." Uncle James's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can." I reached back into my portfolio. "I have the court order establishing me as executor, Miss Simmons' affidavit regarding the forged document, and a forensic handwriting analysis already underway." This last part was a slight exaggeration. The analysis had been requested, but wasn't complete yet. "This is absurd," Aunt Diane declared, standing up. "We're leaving." "Before you go," I said, "you should know that I've changed the locks. Any items removed from this house without my permission as executor will be considered theft from the estate." Patrick slammed his hand on the table. "You can't just lock us out. We have rights." "Yes, you do," I agreed calmly. "Each of you has a 10% interest in the property. I'm happy to buy out those interests at fair market value, or you can maintain your minority ownership with all associated rights and responsibilities." "Buy us out." Melissa laughed incredulously. "With what money?" "Your teacher's salary." I smiled slightly. "That's my concern, not yours." "This isn't over," Uncle James growled, gathering his coat. "Not by a long shot." One by one, they filed out, casting furious glances my way. Only Uncle Robert hesitated at the door. "He always talked about you, you know," he said quietly. "Every time we called. Emma did this, Emma said that. I think he would be proud of you today." The unexpected comment caught me off guard. "Thank you," I managed. Robert nodded once, then followed the others out, closing the door behind him. Alone in Grandpa's dining room, my dining room now, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the schemes, the confrontation. But beneath the hurt and anger was something else, relief. Relief that Grandpa had indeed wanted me to have the farm, that his true wishes would be honored. I walked through the house, running my fingers along the familiar furniture, looking at the family photos, breathing in the lingering scent that would always mean home to me. In the kitchen, a calendar still hung on the wall, marked with Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. Doctor appointments, community events, and in mid-June simply, "Emma's birthday pie." He'd been planning to make me pie for my birthday, even as his health was failing. Outside the window, The afternoon sun illuminated the orchard we'd restored together, the fruit trees just beginning to blossom with the promise of summer. Beyond that stretched fields and pastures, woods and streams. 200 acres of Carter family history. My family might not be finished fighting, but neither was I. This land was my inheritance, not just in legal terms, but in the deeper sense of connection and responsibility. Grandpa had entrusted it to me because he knew I understood its value beyond any dollar amount. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret Simmons' number. There would be more legal work ahead, possibly even court battles. But as I waited for her to answer, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. "Hello, Emma," she answered. "How did the meeting go?" "They weren't happy," I said, watching a pair of cardinals land on the bird feeder Grandpa had built. "But I think there's someone else who should be at our next conversation." "Who's that?" I smiled, thinking of the man who had stood beside Grandpa for decades, working the neighboring land, sharing equipment and knowledge. Harold Johnson, Grandpa's neighbor. I think he might know something about what happened in 2018 when my cousins visited. And I have a feeling there's more to this story than we've uncovered so far. Harold would certainly be a valuable witness, Ms. Simmons agreed. And you might be right about there being more to uncover. Your grandfather made some interesting provisions in his will that we haven't discussed yet. My attention sharpened. What kind of provisions? I think it's better if we go through everything in person. Could you come by my office tomorrow morning? I'll see if Harold is available to join us. After arranging to meet at 10 the next day, I hung up and continued my solitary tour of the farmhouse. In the study, Grandpa's desk stood as he'd left it, organized but lived in, with his reading glasses still perched atop a stack of farming journals. I settled into his worn leather chair, running my hands along the smooth wooden armrests polished by decades of use. The desk drawers were locked, but I knew where Grandpa kept the key, inside an old copy of The Grapes of Wrath on the bookshelf, a private joke about keeping the farm safe. The small brass key slid smoothly into the center drawer lock, and inside I found neatly organized files labeled with Grandpa's precise handwriting. Tax records, equipment maintenance, crop rotation plans, and one labeled simply, "For Emma." My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the folder. Inside was a single envelope with my name written on it in Grandpa's familiar script. I carefully opened it to find several pages of his distinctive handwriting, dated just 2 months before his death. "My dear Emmy, asterisk if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found your way to my desk. I always knew you would. You have your mother's intuition and your father's determination. A powerful combination. Asterisk. Asterisk, I need to tell you some things I couldn't say while I was alive, partly because I was gathering evidence and partly because I didn't want to turn you against your family. But you deserve to know the truth, especially if they try to take what's rightfully yours. Asterisk. Asterisk in 2018. While you were teaching in Europe, Patrick and Melissa visited several times. They brought papers for me to sign. Investment opportunities, they called them. I played along, pretending to be the doddering old man they thought I was. But I never signed anything that would compromise your inheritance. I suspected they were up to something, so I began keeping records of our interactions. Asterisk. Asterisk after their 3rd visit, I installed a small recording device in the study. Michigan is a one-party consent state for recordings, and I made sure to mention this fact on the tapes. What I captured confirmed my suspicions. They were trying to get me to sign documents that would redirect most of your father's portion of the inheritance to them. Asterisk. Asterisk, when that failed, I believe they created forged documents. I can't prove this part, but the timing fits. About a month after their last visit, Diane called asking strange questions about my will, mentioning specific provisions that didn't exist. That's when I contacted Margaret to update my will officially, making you the primary beneficiary and executor. Asterisk. Asterisk, the external hard drive in the bottom right drawer contains all the recordings. The The password is your mother's birthday. Asterisk. Asterisk, there's something else you should know. The farm is worth far more than anyone realizes. 3 years ago, geological surveys confirmed significant natural gas deposits under the North Fields. I never developed them because I was concerned about environmental impacts, but the mineral rights alone are worth millions. Only Harold knows about this. We discovered it on the property line between our farms. Asterisk. Asterisk, this is why they're suddenly so interested in selling. I suspect someone has tipped them off about the gas deposits, though they may not know the full extent of what lies beneath our land. Asterisk. Asterisk, Emmy. I've always told you this farm would be your legacy, and now it truly is. What you do with it is your choice. Develop it, preserve it, sell it. The decision is yours. But make it your decision, not one forced upon you by people who see only dollar signs where we see home. Asterisk. Asterisk, whatever happens, know that I am so proud of the woman you've become. You have the strength to stand your ground and the wisdom to know which battles are worth fighting. Asterisk. Asterisk, all my love. Grandpa asterisk. Asterisk P.S. The best evidence is in Harold's possession. He's been keeping it safe for me. Ask him about the fishing trip documents. Asterisk. I read the letter 3 times, my heart pounding with a mixture of grief, anger, and vindication. Grandpa had known what they were trying to do. He'd been protecting me all along, gathering evidence even as his health declined. With shaking hands, I opened the bottom right drawer and found the external hard drive. I'd need my laptop to access it, but knowing it contained recordings of my cousin's deception gave me a strange sense of relief. This wasn't just my word against theirs anymore, but what were the fishing trip documents that Harold had? And how much did my family know about the natural gas deposits? I carefully replaced the letter in its envelope and tucked it securely in my purse. The hard drive followed, wrapped in a soft cloth I found in another drawer. Then I locked the desk, returned the key to its hiding place, and took one last look around the study. "I won't let you down, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with questions and plans. By the time I arrived at Margaret Simmons' office the next morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, like I'd had too much coffee on an empty stomach. Harold Johnson was already there, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, his lined face breaking into a warm smile when he saw me. "There she is," he said, standing to envelope me in a hug that smelled of earth and aftershave. "Bill's girl." "Thank you for coming, Harold," I said, returning his embrace before taking a seat beside him. Margaret closed her office door and joined us at the small conference table. "Emma, I've filled Harold in on what's happened so far with the forged will and your family's attempt to sell the property." Harold shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. "Can't say I'm surprised, based on what your grandpa told me. Those city relatives never did appreciate what they had in him, or in that land." "I found a letter from Grandpa last night," I said, pulling it from my purse. "He mentioned recordings he made of Patrick and Melissa's visits in 2018, and something about fishing trip documents that you have." Harold's eyes crinkled with something like satisfaction. Wondered when we'd get to that. He reached into his worn leather jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your grandpa and I didn't go fishing much the last few years. His heart couldn't take the excitement, but we used it as our code when he needed me to keep something important." He handed me the envelope. Inside were several documents, including what appeared to be an unsigned copy of the forged will amendment that my cousins had presented, with handwritten notes in the margins in Grandpa's writing. "He found this draft in his mailbox after one of their visits," Harold explained. "Knew right away something wasn't right. They'd left it behind accidentally, probably meant to take it with them to prepare the final version." Margaret examined the document carefully. "This is important evidence. It shows premeditation and intent." I nodded, then continued looking through the envelope. There were also printed emails between Patrick and someone named Thomas Keller at Eastern Energy Exploration, discussing the Carter property potential and preliminary survey results. Is this about the natural gas deposits? I asked Harold. His eyebrows shot up. He told you about that? In his letter, he said you both discovered it on the property line. Harold nodded slowly. 3 years ago, company approached both of us about doing surveys. Results came back showing significant deposits. I turned them down. Don't want that mess on my land. Bill felt the same way. But I guess someone tipped off your cousins. This Thomas Keller, I said, pointing to the email. Could he have told them? Wouldn't surprise me. Those energy companies play all angles. Margaret was examining the emails with a lawyer's careful eye. These suggest Patrick was exploring the potential value without disclosing it to the rest of the family. That would explain the sudden interest in selling to a developer. They could flip the mineral rights afterward for additional profit. Or the developer already knows about the gas. I suggested. Maybe they're working together. That would explain the $7 million offer, Margaret agreed. It's substantially above market value for the agricultural and residential potential alone. Harold snorted. Substantially below what it's worth with those gas deposits, though. A knock at the door interrupted us. Margaret's assistant poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a Mr. Carter here demanding to see you. Says it's urgent. Margaret looked at me questioningly. Which Mr. Carter? I asked. He says he's your uncle, James Carter. I exchanged glances with Harold and Margaret. What do you think? I asked them quietly. Might be interesting to hear what he has to say, Margaret replied. Your choice, Emma. Something told me this unexpected visit wasn't coincidental. Let him in, I decided. Uncle James looked significantly less composed than he had at yesterday's meeting. His normally immaculate shirt was slightly rumpled, and his face had the drawn look of someone who hadn't slept well. He stopped short when he saw Harold. I didn't realize this was a party. Harold was a close friend of Grandpa's, I said evenly. He's helping us sort through some inconsistencies in the documents you and the others presented. James's gaze flicked between the three of us before settling on me. I need to speak with you privately, Emma. Anything you have to say can be said in front of my lawyer and Mr. Johnson. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he considered his options. Finally, he sank into the remaining chair. Fine. I'm here because things have gotten out of hand. You mean your attempt to defraud me using forged documents? I asked calmly. It wasn't my idea, he said immediately. Patrick and Melissa approached me after they found out about the gas deposits. They said if we could convince Bill to sell or change his will, we'd all benefit significantly. Margaret leaned forward. Mr. Carter, I should warn you that you're admitting to potentially criminal activity. James ran a hand through his graying hair. I know that, but I can't. I never thought it would go this far. When the fake amendment didn't work, I assumed we'd drop it. Then Bill died, and Patrick said we should try again, that Emma would never know the difference. But I did know, I said quietly. Yes, you did. He looked genuinely tired now. Look, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm here because things are spiraling. After yesterday's meeting, Patrick contacted the developer directly. He's claiming you're mentally unstable, that you fabricated documents to block the sale. My blood ran cold. He what? He's desperate. We all are in different ways. The truth is, Emma, I'm nearly bankrupt. The market crash hit my investments hard, and I've been keeping up appearances on borrowed money. Patrick and Melissa have their own financial problems. That gas money seemed like the answer to everyone's problems. Except mine, I pointed out, since I wouldn't have received my fair share under your plan. James at least had the decency to look ashamed. No, you wouldn't have. Harold, who had been silently watching this exchange, finally spoke. James, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your daddy would be mighty disappointed in what you've become." James flinched as if he'd been slapped. "Why are you really here?" I asked. "It's not just to warn me about Patrick's desperate moves." He met my eyes directly for the first time. "I want out. I'll sign over my 10% to you. Testify about the forgery, whatever you need. In exchange, I want immunity from prosecution." Margaret's expression remained professionally neutral. "That would be up to the district attorney, not us." "But you could put in a good word," James pressed. "Say I cooperated fully." I studied my uncle's face, seeing not just desperation but genuine fear. "Why should I trust you? How do I know this isn't another trick?" James reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "Because I brought this. It's a text exchange between Patrick and the developer from yesterday." He slid it across the table. I unfolded it to find screenshots of messages clearly planning to discredit me and force a sale despite my objections. One message from the developer read, "Asterisk, if she's declared incompetent. Does the executor role pass to the next beneficiary?" Asterisk. Patrick's response made my stomach turn. Asterisk, yes. We're gathering evidence of her instability now. Her mother had mental health issues before she died. Will suggest Emma has the same condition. Asterisk. My mother had suffered from depression after my father's death. Using that against me was a new low even for Patrick. Why would the developer get involved in something so unethical? I wondered aloud. "Because it's not really Meridian Development who's interested," James admitted. "It's Eastern Energy. Meridian is just the front to acquire the land without raising questions about the gas rights." The pieces were falling into place now. My family's sudden interest in the farm, the rushed sale, the forged documents, it all connected to the hidden value beneath the soil. "Mr. Carter," Margaret said, her tone all business, "if you're serious about cooperation, I'll need a full written statement detailing everything you know about the forged will and this conspiracy to declare Emma incompetent." James nodded wearily. "I'll do it. Today. Just help me find a way out of this mess." "I'll need those text messages and any other evidence you have," she continued. "You'll have it." I sat back, processing this unexpected turn of events. My uncle, who hours ago I'd considered an enemy, was now potentially my most valuable ally. "There's one more thing," James said hesitantly. "Patrick contacted a psychiatrist who's willing to evaluate you without meeting you. They're moving quickly, Emma. They could file for an emergency competency hearing as early as next week." My laugh held no humor. "On what grounds?" "That I don't want to sell my inheritance. They're building a case that you're irrationally attached to the property, that you've created delusions about your grandfather's wishes. They'll use your mother's history, your close relationship with Bill, even your choice to stay nearby instead of pursuing opportunities elsewhere." The injustice of it tightened my chest. So my love for Grandpa and this farm is going to be weaponized against me. "Not if we move faster," Margaret interjected firmly. "With James's testimony and the evidence you already have, we can preemptively file for an injunction against any competency proceedings. And we can counter with evidence of fraud and conspiracy." Harold reached over and patted my hand. "Don't you worry, Emma. Truth has a way of coming out." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "All right, let's fight back." The next week passed in a whirlwind of legal maneuvers and revelations. James proved true to his word, providing a detailed statement about the forgery scheme and Patrick's plan to have me declared incompetent. Margaret filed for emergency injunctions while simultaneously preparing a civil case against Patrick, Melissa, and potentially the developer. I accessed Grandpa's recordings, which provided damning evidence of my cousin's attempts to manipulate him into changing his will. In one particularly disturbing conversation, Patrick could be heard suggesting that I was too emotionally unstable to handle the responsibility of the farm, the same narrative they were now trying to use against me. Through it all, I continued teaching my 5th grade class, drawing strength from the routine and the children's uncomplicated enthusiasm. I hadn't told anyone at school about the situation, preferring to keep my professional life separate from the family drama. But everything collided on Wednesday afternoon as I was dismissing my students. Through the classroom window, I spotted Patrick's sleek BMW pulling into the school's visitor parking lot. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Was he actually going to confront me at work? I quickly sent my last students on their way and called the front office. Nancy, it's Emma Carter in room 24. If a man named Patrick Carter asks to see me, please don't send him to my classroom. Tell him I've already left for the day. Everything okay, Emma? Nancy asked, concern evident in her voice. Just a family matter I'd rather handle outside of school. I gathered my things quickly, planning to exit through the side door, but as I stepped into the hallway, there was Patrick, somehow having bypassed the front office. Emma, he called, striding toward me with forced joviality. Got a minute to chat with your favorite cousin? Several teachers and lingering students turned to look. I maintained my professional composure while internally calculating my options. This isn't the appropriate place, Patrick, I said quietly. Please leave. He reached me, lowering his voice. Don't be difficult. I'm trying to resolve our little misunderstanding without things getting ugly. By having me declared incompetent? That's your idea of not ugly? His expression flickered with surprise before hardening. I see Uncle James has been talking. Disappointing. I thought he understood what was at stake. I think we all understand exactly what's at stake now, I replied evenly. And this conversation is over. I turned to walk away, but Patrick grabbed my arm. You can't just walk away from this, Emma. That property is worth more than you could earn in 10 lifetimes. Be reasonable. I was acutely aware of the audience we'd attracted. Curious teachers, wide-eyed students, a janitor who had stopped mopping to watch. This was exactly what Patrick wanted, to provoke a scene that could later be characterized as unstable behavior. With deliberate calm, I removed his hand from my arm. Patrick, I'm at work. I'm asking you once more to leave. If you don't, I'll have security escort you out. As if on cue, our school resource officer appeared at the end of the hallway. I'd never been so grateful for standard security protocols. Patrick noticed him too and stepped back, adjusting his tie. This isn't finished, Emma. That farm will be sold one way or another. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Goodbye, Patrick, I said firmly, then walked toward the resource officer, who was now approaching with a questioning look. Everything all right, Ms. Carter? Officer Reynolds asked, his eyes on Patrick. My cousin was just leaving, I replied. Would you mind making sure he finds his way out? Patrick's face flushed with anger, but he forced a tight smile. No need for an escort. I know the way. He turned and walked quickly toward the exit. Officer Reynolds stayed beside me. Want to tell me what that was about? Family disagreement over an inheritance, I said simply. Nothing to worry about. But as I watched Patrick's retreating form, I knew this confrontation was different. He had crossed the line by coming to my workplace. The calculated attempt to create a scene showed just how far he was willing to go. That evening, I called Margaret to report what had happened. This actually works in our favor, she said after listening to my account. We can add harassment and intimidation to our filing, and his appearance at your workplace demonstrates the lengths he's willing to go to pressure you. It felt different this time, I admitted. More desperate. That's because they're running out of options. The emergency hearing is tomorrow, and with the evidence we've presented, I expect the judge to grant our injunction against any competency proceedings. And after that, we move forward with the civil case against Patrick and Melissa for fraud and conspiracy. The district attorney will determine whether to pursue criminal charges. What about Aunt Diane and Melissa's husband? Were they involved? Margaret's hesitation told me something before she even spoke. James's statement suggests Diane was aware of the plan, but not actively involved in the forgery. As for Melissa's husband, there's no evidence he participated. I thought about my family, the people who should have been closest to me, who instead had tried to steal my inheritance and then discredit me when that failed. The betrayal still hurt, but something had shifted inside me. The anger was giving way to a strange sort of pity. They never understood what the farm really meant to Grandpa, I said softly, or to me. People often project their own values onto others, Margaret replied. If money is what matters most to them, they assume it must be what matters most to everyone. After we hung up, I walked through my small apartment, restless with anticipation of tomorrow's hearing. On impulse, I grabbed my keys and drove to the farm, feeling a need to connect with the place that had become the center of this storm. The sun was setting as I pulled up the long driveway, casting the old farmhouse in amber light. I let myself in and walked through the quiet rooms, eventually finding myself on the back porch where Grandpa and I had spent countless evenings watching the day and over his fields. I sat in his old rocker, listening to the familiar creaks of the house settling and the distant calls of birds heading to roost. Despite everything, the legal battles, the family betrayal, the uncertainty still ahead, I felt a profound sense of rightness being here. The sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my thoughts. Headlights swept the yard as a car pulled up beside mine. I tensed, wondering if Patrick had followed me, but then recognized Harold's old pickup truck. He emerged with a thermos in one hand and made his way slowly up to the porch. "Hope I'm not intruding," he called. "Saw your lights on and thought you might like some company." "I'd love some," I replied honestly. He settled into the chair beside mine and unscrewed the thermos cap. Coffee with a touch of something stronger. Medicinal purposes only. His eyes twinkled as he poured a steaming cup and handed it to me. The rich aroma of coffee mingled with something that smelled suspiciously like Grandpa's favorite bourbon. I took a grateful sip, feeling the warmth spread through me. "Your Grandpa and I sat right here more times than I can count," Harold said, pouring his own cup. "Solved all the world's problems, or at least pretended we could." I smiled. "I remember. You two would talk for hours while I did homework at the kitchen table." He was so proud of you, Emma. Every achievement, every milestone. He'd tell me all about it, chest puffed up like a rooster. "I miss him," I said simply. Harold nodded. "Me too. But he'd be mighty proud of how you're handling all this. Standing your ground, fighting for what's right." We sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping our spiked coffee and watching the last light fade from the sky. "What will you do with the place?" Harold finally asked, "once all this legal business is settled." I'd been thinking about that question a lot lately. I want to keep it as a working farm. Maybe lease some of the fields to start while I learn more about the operation. Eventually, I'd like to transition part of it to an educational farm, bring students out to learn about agriculture, sustainability. "That's a fine idea," Harold nodded approvingly. "Land like this ought to be worked, and there's nothing better than seeing young ones connect with where their food comes from." "And the gas deposits?" I asked, "What would you do about those?" He considered the question seriously. "That's a complicated one. Those deposits aren't going anywhere. They'll still be there in 20 years or 50. No need to rush into anything. If it were me, I'd wait until there are better, cleaner extraction methods. Or maybe use it as a bargaining chip to protect other parts of the land through conservation easements." His perspective resonated with me. The idea that this wasn't a decision I needed to make immediately, that the land's value went beyond its immediate financial potential. "Thank you, Harold, for everything, the evidence, the support, the advice." He waved away my thanks. "Just being neighborly, the way your Grandpa always was to me." As Harold drove away later, I remained on the porch, feeling more settled than I had in days. Tomorrow would bring its challenges with a court hearing, but tonight, sitting in Grandpa's chair on Grandpa's porch, I felt his presence and his confidence in me. The next morning dawned clear and cool. I dressed carefully in a simple navy suit that had been my splurge when I got my first teaching job. Margaret had suggested I look competent but not flashy for the hearing. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of town. As I climbed the steps, I spotted Margaret waiting by the entrance, clipboard in hand. "Ready?" she asked as I approached. "As I'll ever be." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with dark wood paneling and rows of benches. Patrick and Melissa were already seated on one side with their lawyer, studiously avoiding looking in my direction. Uncle James sat alone several rows behind them, his shoulders hunched. Judge Eleanor Winters, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, entered promptly at 9 o'clock. After the initial formalities, she addressed the attorneys. "I've reviewed the filings in this matter, including the evidence of alleged forgery and conspiracy. This hearing is to determine whether to grant Ms. Carter's request for injunctive relief preventing any competency proceedings against her." Patrick's attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, stood. "Your Honor, my clients have legitimate concerns about their cousin's mental state and her ability to manage a substantial asset like the Carter farm. They're acting out of concern for both Ms. Carter and the family legacy." Margaret's response was measured but devastating. "Your Honor, we have provided substantial evidence that Mr. Patrick Carter and Ms. Melissa Carter fabricated documents in an attempt to defraud Ms. Emma Carter of her rightful inheritance. When that failed, they concocted this plan to have her declared incompetent. We have written testimony from James Carter confirming these facts, as well as recordings made by the deceased, William Carter, documenting their attempts to manipulate him." The judge listened impassively, then turned to Patrick's attorney. "Counsel, are you aware that filing for a competency hearing in bad faith, particularly as part of a scheme to gain control of assets, could constitute abuse of process?" The attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, my clients genuinely believe—" "Save it," Judge Winters interrupted. "I've reviewed the evidence, including the text messages discussing how to have Ms. Carter declared incompetent to gain control of valuable gas rights. This appears to be a transparent attempt to misuse the legal system." She turned to me directly. "Ms. Carter, in your filing you've requested not only an injunction against competency proceedings, but also a restraining order preventing your cousins from entering the Carter property or contacting you at your workplace. Given the evidence presented, I'm granting both requests effective immediately." Relief washed over me. The judge continued, addressing Patrick and Melissa directly. "Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation regarding the forged documents. This court takes a very dim view of attempts to defraud rightful heirs or abuse legal proceedings for financial gain." Patrick's face had gone pale, while Melissa appeared on the verge of tears. Their attorney was frantically whispering to them. Judge Winters gave a final tap of her gavel. "This hearing is adjourned. Ms. Carter, you're free to proceed with the administration of your grandfather's estate as the rightful executor." As we exited the courtroom, Margaret squeezed my arm. That went even better than I expected. Judge Winters clearly saw through their scheme. In the courthouse hallway, I found myself face to face with Patrick and Melissa. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the weight of what had transpired hanging between us. Melissa spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Patrick cut her off. "Save it, Mel. She's made her choice." He turned to me, his expression hard. "Congratulations, Emma. You win the dirt farm. Hope it was worth losing your family over." "I didn't lose my family, Patrick," I replied quietly. "You and Melissa proved you were never really family to begin with." Family doesn't try to steal from each other or use a loved one's mental health struggles as a weapon. This isn't over, he muttered. Actually, it is, Margaret interjected. The restraining order is effective immediately. You need to stay at least 500 feet away from Ms. Carter and the farm property. They retreated without another word, their lawyer hurrying after them. Uncle James approached cautiously. Emma, I know an apology isn't enough, but I am truly sorry. I studied his face, seeing genuine regret there. Why did you change sides, Uncle James? Really? He sighed heavily. When I saw how far Patrick was willing to go, talking about having you declared incompetent, using your mother's depression against you, I remembered your father. My brother would have been disgusted with me, with all of us. He paused, and I remembered the little girl who used to follow Bill around the farm, soaking up every word like it was gospel. You loved that place the way the rest of us never did. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was understanding. Thank you for doing the right thing, eventually. Will you be at the farm this weekend? He asked hesitantly. I have some of your father's things I've been keeping, things that should be yours. I nodded. Saturday afternoon would work. He gave a small, grateful smile and departed, his posture a little straighter than before. As Margaret and I walked down the courthouse steps into the spring sunshine, I felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. What happens now? I asked. Now you become the caretaker of your grandfather's legacy, she replied, just as he intended. 3 months later, I stood in the orchard Grandpa and I had restored together, watching a group of my 5th grade students carefully picking apples under Harold's watchful guidance. Their excited voices carried on the September breeze as they filled their baskets with the first harvest I'd overseen as the farm's owner. The legal aftermath of the hearing had been swift and decisive. Patrick and Melissa had faced criminal charges for the forgery, eventually accepting a plea deal that included probation and significant community service. The Eastern Energy connection had been exposed, leading to the developer backing out entirely. Uncle James had made good on his promise to transfer his 10% ownership to me, while Aunt Diane had sold me her share at a fair price, bringing my ownership to 90% of the farm. I'd taken a sabbatical from teaching to focus on learning the farm operation, with Harold as my patient mentor. The educational farm program had started small, just occasional field trips like today's, but was growing steadily. As for the natural gas deposits, they remained untouched beneath the soil. There would be time enough to decide their fate, just as Harold had suggested. For now, it was enough to know they were there, a resource to be considered carefully rather than exploited hastily. Ms. Carter, look at this one. One of my students held up a perfectly formed apple, her face alight with pride. I walked over to admire her find, smiling at her enthusiasm. That's a beauty, Lily. Perfect for baking. Can we really make pies with our apples? She asked eagerly. Absolutely. That's next week's lesson. Harvest to table. As the children continued their work, I gazed around at the land that had become truly mine, not just in legal ownership, but in deep, meaningful stewardship. I'd moved into the farmhouse, filling it with new memories while honoring the old ones. The study remained largely as Grandpa had left it, though I'd added my own books alongside his. In quiet moments, I sometimes imagined him walking beside me through the fields, nodding approval at my decisions, offering wisdom in that gentle way of his. The farm wasn't just acres and buildings and crops. It was his legacy of patience, resilience, and integrity. And now it was mine to carry forward one harvest at a time.